Hi, I'm Eitimad Hashim. In this lecture, we are going to learn about one of the ecosystem processes, energy flow and feeding relationships. There are two major ecosystem processes, energy flow and nutrient cycles. And in this lecture, we will cover energy flow. Energy flow is always represented by food chains and food webs in the ecosystem. Energy and materials are ecosystem components, and they are part of the ecosystem, abiotic components that interact or interact with the biotic components, which may be plants, animals, microorganisms, whatever. The biotic components are divided into two, autotrophs and heterotrophs. Autotrophs is the organisms that can synthesize this food from simple material such as water and carbon dioxide. And the only autotrophic organisms are plants. And examples for heterotrophs like man, like other animals who can't synthesize the food from the simplest material like water and carbon dioxide. Regarding energy rule, and according to the first and second law of thermodynamics, energy can neither, according to the first law, energy can't be created or destroyed, only converted from one form to another. So, energy can neither be created nor destroyed. Then you may ask yourself, from where does energy come? Only converted from form to another. That means energy, which means some forms of energy are more useful than the other. And this is confirmed by the second law of thermodynamics that we will be discussed later. Before going through the energy flow, and then we will discuss some of the feeding terminology that we will found in the energy flow, food chains and food webs. Energy enters the ecosystem as sunlight, and the plants use the sunlight in photosynthesis process to turn water and carbon dioxide into food molecules or glucose. An organism that can make its own food from these simple materials, carbon dioxide and water, is called producer. So plants is a producer. But the producers, why they called producers? Because they are the source of all the food in the ecosystem. Also, they are called autotrophs. While the other organisms that obtain its food by feeding on other organisms or ready food like glucose, that means did not make its own food, is called a consumer. And also the consumer is called heterotrophs. Why heterotrophs? Because they didn't able to make its own food from simple materials. Regarding consumers types, there are 4 types of the consumer. Herbivores that eat only plants. Carnivores eat meats or animals. Omnivores eat both plants and animals, and decomposers that break down the waste and dead organisms. Also ready food, but they are as waste or dead organisms. So as we said, energy enter most ecosystem as sunlight. And the main source, that means the main source, if you ask yourself from where we get the energy, or from where does energy come? Energy come from the sun. So the main source of energy is the sun that provide constant flow of energy, but we use just a teeny portion, maybe less than 1%. Then the plants grab this energy and use it to produce glucose or to produce food. So plants are called producers by the process called photosynthesis. Photosynthesis. That means the producer converts the sun energy into chemical energy, which is the glucose or the food that made by the plants. So this organism can use most of these food or energy to maintain life processes and transfer the rest to the next organism, the consumer. Let us go through the food chain to see how the energy moves from the sun to the producer and then to the consumers, and how it transfers in the food through the food chain. So the first organism in the food chain is the plant, and here called grass. Here our example is the grass. So the grass or this plant is called producer or autotrophs. Producer, autotrophs. That makes its own food from sunlight and simple material. The second organism, grasshopper, feed on the grass on the first one, is called the first level of consumer. This is producer, that is why it's called autotroph. But this is one is consumer, and it is called first level of consumer, and it is called heterotroph. But because also it just consume plants, it's called herbivores. So the first animal, the second organism is called herbivores because eat only grass. Then the frog, here the second consumer, eat the grasshopper or eat the first level consumers, which is heterotrophs and herbivores. But the frogs will be considered the second consumer and going to be heterotroph, but in this time it will be carnivores because frog eat grasshopper and grasshopper is an animal. So when an animal eat animal, we call it carnivore. But when it eat grass or plant, we call it herbivores. So grasshopper is a herbivore's consumer and frog is consumer too, but the second consumer, so it is carnivores. So how energy flow in the food chain? The food chain is a sequence of organisms. This sequence is grasses, grasshopper, and frog. From sunlight, grasses, grasshopper, and frog, we call it food chain. Then energy flow in the ecosystem through the food chain. They are creating this food chain. And usually food chain just got few steps, up to 4, 5, maybe maximum 6, not more than that. It is not complicated. It's just a representation of how the energy flow. In order to remember and memorize more or the terminology for the food chains and food webs, food chains, we need to take an example in order to memorize more the terminology and to be familiar with. Our first example is a food chain from terrestrial ecosystem. Terrestrial ecosystem means land ecosystem. So, the energy, main source of the energy to the earth or to the biosphere is the sun. So, energy coming from the sun. And this energy captured as light from the sun by the plant. So we call the plant a producer. The producers is called also autotrophs, and it is anchor of the chain. It produces because the organic matter for the other organisms. So, other organisms, herbivore is a consumer. Number 2, eat the plant. So it called, because it eat ready food, then we call it herbivore. We call it consumer. We call it heterotrophs. So it is the primary consumer because it directly consumes the plant. Directly consumes the plant. So here we call it herbivore. So herbivore gets energy and material from the producer they eat. And the herbivore eat producers, so it called herbivores. There is consumer, heterotrophs. Then the secondary consumer eats the herbivores. Also it called heterotrophs. It can be a carnivore because it eats animal, but it can be first order of carnivores because this here at this level or trophic level number 3, also it can eat both animals and plants. If it eats both animal and plants, then we call it omnivores. So here the secondary consumers may be omnivores, may be carnivores. Carnivores then get energy and material from herbivores they eat, or from herbivores and carnivores. From here, or eat animal and plant. So regarding the tertiary consumer, second order of carnivores, eat animals, and then it will be carnivores, only carnivores. First order can be carnivores, can be omnivores, but the second order in most time it will be just a carnivore. So here is the second order of carnivores, but it's the fourth trophic level. Here is the first trophic level, feeding level, second feeding level, 3 feeding level or trophic level, and 4 trophic levels. So let us make a summary of the food chain in the terrestrial on land ecosystem. The first trophic level is the plant. So we call the plant the producer. And the second trophic level is animal, but this animal only consume plants. So we call it herbivore. We call it first consumer, but herbivore. The third trophic level is an animal, but the animals here may eat plants or animals. It eat both. It can eat only animals or can eat animals and plants. If eat only animals, we call it carnivore, but we call it first order of carnivore. If eat plants and animals together, we call it omnivores, like us, we are omnivores. Then if you come to the trophic level number 4, it will be third consumer, because here first consumer, second consumer, third consumer. But it is first trophic level, second trophic level, third trophic level, fourth trophic level. Okay, so as the fourth trophic level, it will be third consumer, but second carnivores order. And the second order of carnivores only eat animals. Okay, let's take also second an example for food chain. We will take it from the aquatic environment. In the aquatic environment, also there is a plant, also there is some living species that have chlorophyll called phytoplankton. So the phytoplankton in the water environment or in the aquatic environment, they are the producer. So we call it the producer, and we call them also autotrophs. So they are the anchor of aquatic food chain. They produce all the organic matter for all other organisms. The phytoplankton, first trophic level, will be eaten by zooplankton. Zooplankton. So zooplankton, zoo animal. So zooplankton is heterotrophs because they take ready food from phytoplankton and then they are consumers. They are the first consumers. Second travel levels, but first consumers. So the primary consumers directly consume producers or phytoplankton. Then the secondary consumer or the fish, small fish, feed on the zooplankton or food on the two, zooplankton and phytoplankton. So if they feed on the two, they will be called omnivore. If they just feed on the zooplankton, we call them carnivore. So they will be the first order of carnivore. So you will follow the same sequence that happened, the same terminology that happened in the terrestrial ecosystem. And the same things, then you go through the naming of the trophic levels and naming of the consumers and producers. We have only one producers, plants, we call them producers, we call them autotrophs. And we have several consumers and they animals, and we call them consumers. We call them consumers. All of them, the consumers are animals, and all the producers are just plants. The producer, just plants capable of photosynthesis and producing food from simple material. But this is not really happened in the life. Okay? It is just simple like that. Each one is the other. So, as a realistic, the food chains relationship, if we link these food chains, it will be food web. So in the reality, we will have a food web. So the definition of the food web is the interconnected food chain in order to describe the various pathways that the energy taken. As you can see here, each animal can be eaten by several or by others, not just by one animal. The other one, the food chain, is just sequence of few organisms and few steps. But in the reality, in the life, we will got food web more than food chain. And here is the, if you can see the trophic levels, and here's the explanation. You can reconstruct several food chains from this food web. As we are going through the food chains and food web, we go through the trophic levels. So from the trophic levels, ecologists built ecological pyramids. Ecological pyramids is a graphical representation of relationship between different living organisms at different trophic levels. Okay, they look at the different trophic levels in order to construct the ecological pyramids. And there are three types of an ecological pyramids: pyramid of energy, pyramid of biomass, and pyramid of number. Pyramid of energy, pyramid of number, and pyramid of biomass. In most food chains, the number of the organism at each trophic level, at the bottom of each trophic level, decreases if it goes up. That is why they call it pyramid, because it built a pyramid for whatever, if it is energy or numbers or biomass. So you can see the shape of the pyramid. More animals or organism will be at the bottom and less at the top. That is why they call pyramid. So let us check each kind of pyramid. Yeah. So trophic pyramid represent different feeding levels or different trophic levels. Different trophic levels represent trophic pyramids. As we said, the base of the pyramid represent more animals, and in most cases it will be the producers, and then each step up represent different consumers. So like here, the plants will be the producer, and here the first trophic level will be the consumer, and second consumer, and tertiary consumer. So it builds the pyramid. If the number of trophic level is determined, it will be determined by the number of organisms, or it can be determined by the amount of the energy, or it can be determined by the biomass. So according to how the scientists calculated the pyramid, or determine the pyramid, it will be determined the pyramid kinds. Is it pyramid of energy, or pyramid of numbers, or pyramid of biomass? Okay, let us go through each one. For energy pyramids, energy represent total energy stored by the producer and the organism in the energy level, on this trophic level, in the first trophic level. So in each stage or trophic level, up to 90% of the energy is used by the producer. For example, here is the first trophic level for its life processes like respiration, photosynthesis, reproduction, whatever. Okay, 90% of the energy will be used by the producer in the first trophic levels, and only 10% from it will be transferred to the second trophic level. So only 10% of the energy at each stage will be transferred from the first one to the second, from second to the third, from third to the fourth. This is 90%, and 10% is called ecological efficiency or rule, or 10% rule. 10% rule. So what is the 10% law? 10% rule or law was given by Ramon Lindemann, and this law states that when energy is transferred from one trophic level to the other, only 10% of the energy from the organic matter is passed on. Why? Because the animals use, or the plants use, 90% of the energy for the life processes, for respiration, for photosynthesis, for reproduction, etc. Okay, then let us go for pyramid of numbers. Show the numbers of individuals at each trophic level. Here, like here, we have 5,000 plants. Numbers of plants, of producer. Okay, then when we go to the primary consumer, 500. Then when we go to the next one, 50,000, and then 500,000, 50,000, and then tertiary consumer will be like 500. Why? Because the efficiency or the rule saying that only 10% will be transferred from trophic level to the next. Only 10%. So that is why it will be taking shape of a pyramid. So one of the easiest way to quantify the various trophic levels in an ecosystem is to count the number of the individual. So the pyramid of the biomass is also upright, okay, except for that observed in the ocean. We will see this later. Okay, but here pyramid of the numbers, always it will be most times will be upwards. But when we go to the oceans, because we will see later how it will be upside down. Okay, so we will get in the oceans in some pyramid of numbers, inverted pyramid of numbers. The pyramid of numbers is usually upright, except for specific situations, like that thousands of insects, all of them fit just on 3 leaves because they are very teeny and small, and then the tree is big, they feed on them. So if you draw, if the scientists draw this pyramid, it will be inverted pyramid of numbers. So the inverted pyramid has thousands of insects depends on only one tree. So it will be upside down. But this is in specific cases. But normally it's supposed to be يعني upward. Okay. The third kind or type of ecological pyramid is pyramid of biomass. The pyramid of the biomass also is a measure of the total dry mass of the organism. Just weighing them and then see how much they, because for the phytoplankton very small in البايوماس حقها it make very يعني it make very large here because a lot of them will make these the anchor for the pyramid. Then it give the shape of the pyramid. But also for the biomass, when you deal with the aquatic ecosystem, what you observe in the ocean is that large number of zooplankton, the second one, depends on relatively smaller number of phytoplanktons. So that makes the pyramid down right. It's not upright, it is inverted pyramid of the biomass. Okay, so now we cover all the feeding relationships and the feeding terminology. We go through food chain, we go through food webs, and we go through the trophic trophic levels, feeding levels, and then we go through the pyramids. But also we can see that the pyramids have got a lot of limitations. So let us speak about the limitation by the ecological pyramids. These pyramids only applicable to simple food chain. It is not applicable to web chains, to food webs. It's applicable just to simple food chains, so which do not يعني occur naturally. Also, more than one species may occupy multiple trophic levels, may be found in more than one trophic levels, as in the case of the food web. Thus, this system does not take into account food webs. Also, the pyramid system do not consider the possibility of the existence of same species at different trophic levels. Also, the decomposers are not considered here in any of the pyramid, even though they form an important part of various ecosystems. And also, those pyramids do not deliver any concepts in relation to variation in season and climate. We know that living organisms, they are different in their biomass, in their reproduction, in their amount regarding season and climate. And here are some of the resources that you can use to enrich your knowledge. And thank you so much, and we'll see you in the next lecture, inshallah, regarding nutrient cycling. Thank you.